Hey, deserving listeners, Natalia Grace Season 2 documentary on HBO Max, or just Max Discovery, I'm not sure.
Invited me in, and he wasn't dressed.
Okay, so she's talking about how some guy invited her in and he wasn't dressed. The way she tells the story, it sounds credible. And yeah, of course, because on average in any community, you're going to have some predators, unfortunately. And she is a walking open invitation for victimization. I hope that things don't go badly for her here.
I asked him what he was watching, and it was a video. It was a very sexual video. But I didn't know what it was exactly. He played it, and he's like, you can watch it. And I just remember, like, can we watch something else? And he was like, just watch it, it's okay. I was sitting on the couch, and he moved to the other end of the couch. So
when people use the word grooming willy-nilly, it upsets me sometimes because this is grooming. You want to know what grooming actually is? This is grooming. And specifically, it's using a tactic that sexual abusers will learn to use, which is to desensitize their victims slowly to the abuse. They want to go straight to abusing the child, but they suspect if they go straight from A to Z, the child will raise an alarm, run away, or something. Whereas if you build up to it, then they believe they're more likely to get to Z. So they have to start with A, B, C, D. And B, for this guy, is to put in pornography and just say, hey, we're just watching a movie. In that moment, the victim, the discomfort is only a little bit of discomfort, but then you habituate to that. It becomes normalized, and then you can take another step. And, there's a lot of examples of this even outside of sexual abuse grooming, but that appears to be what's happening here. And this is, we can blame the perpetrator here, but we can also blame the parents.
I seen enough that it was just very uncomfortable. Like, I'm just, very weirded out. Like, I'm very uncomfortable right now. Like, I'm not even comfortable in my own seat. Like, it's just...
That man, he was a dirty old man.
Yeah. Okay, so we have confirmation. So it sounds absolutely credible. The story sounded credible. And then the neighbor saying, yeah, dirty old man. Now, this could be a generation thing as well. It doesn't let people off the hook, but when it comes to the past, that's the way people would frame it. In fact, hearing someone of her age talking in that way, I'm reminded of that. They're like, he's just a dirty old man. It's just a way to avoid. And it's not because she's evil or complicit with it. It's just that that's what was in the air, right? Like, men will be men. He's a little dirty. He's a little perverted. But, if you just ignore it, everything's fine. Instead of recognizing, no, this is a perpetrator living amongst us and we have to do something about it, which wasn't the way that people talked generally back then. It was all swept under the rug.
Because some other lady was going to get her mail and walked by, and he was standing there in the nude, and she reported him to the office. But Natalia never complained about any of it.
The neighbor reported to the office. Who knows if the office did anything, but should call the police, right? And I'm guessing the victim didn't know to do that, or didn't know it'd be okay to do that, or whatever. But yeah, that's an absolute, at the very least, it's worthy of an investigation, right? And this is how perpetrators continue to perpetrate, is that everyone's uncomfortable, and our sex negativity culture just causes everyone to shut down and be like, I just don't want to talk about it. I always give the analogy of, if the woman going to the mailbox had been stabbed by him, she would immediately call the police, and she would have no problem just saying, hey, by the way, that guy stabbed me. But somehow when it comes to sexual assault, everyone's hush-hush about it, because we have a sex-negative society that shames victims, that shames everybody. What were you wearing? What were you doing? Everyone's just giggly about, oh, he's naked, it's funny, you wouldn't do that if someone stabbed you. It's the same thing. It's harm. It's someone who is out to harm. Now, who knows? Maybe he was having some kind of cognitive event and he didn't know that he was, but, hearing what we're hearing, it's likely that he purposely was naked to expose himself to someone else because he wants to have other people uncomfortable. That's the sadistic nature of sexual sadism, is that they get pleasure, sexual pleasure, and just general pleasure when other people are made to feel uncomfortable by sexuality. And they don't really care in what way that happens. And it will, rape, of course, is one version of that. But another version that rapists might engage in is by doing something like this, because it is less likely to get the cops called. You might have excuses. It's maybe a little easier to get away with it. So it all just needs to be seen in that category.
Other lady was going to get her mail and walked by, and he was standing there in the nude, and she reported him to the office. But Natalia never complained about any of these things when she was living out of the apartment. She was always talking about being with guys and sex. And
okay, so this notion that, well, I don't think it happened because she never complained about it. What? Yeah, this woman really does have a black and white perspective. There's no nuance. So is it possible? So she's claiming, and I think others did too, that she often Natalia would talk about being with guys. I think some people are saying that she was bragging about being a sex worker across town or something. Is it possible that yeah, it's possible. But again, an 8-year-old that is doing something like that, you don't say she's evil or she needs to be disciplined. You think, what went wrong here? So, yeah. Who knows what Natalia was thinking or resorting to survive or to bond, because you could see her just think about the timeline. She is, by the time she starts to think for herself, she's either with her third adoptive family in Ukraine or she's in the orphanage, and she's starting to piece things together and learn things. God knows what she learned. Then she is shipped all the way across the world, and there's a bunch of handlers probably, and she's like, how does the world work? Then she moves into this New Hampshire family, and who knows what happened there. I suspect that there were some behavioral problems from Natalia, not her fault, and somewhat typical of, at the very least, the initial phase of adopting a kid like this with that kind of history. So that's not super weird. And she's like, you're my family. This is great. And she bonds, right? Because time goes by much slower to us adults. It's like, what's 2 years to a kid, or what's 1 year? For children, that's a lifetime. To a child, that's forever. It's like, oh my God. And then you're shipped off, and then you're with Christine and Michael. God knows what lessons you learn there. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're 8 and you're in an apartment, and you're being told you're an adult, and you know that there's this thing called sex, and you're trying to get people to pay attention. It's just, God knows what sort of decisions or ideas that she was having about maybe there was another neighbor that was a sex worker that talked that way, or I don't know. You don't look at an 8-year-old and say that they made this plan to do this. It's all confusion and discombobulation based on things that they've absorbed. So God knows, what she could have talked a lot about sex. It's possible. But again, I don't blame her necessarily, because I think she's being manipulated. I wonder what she would say now, having watched season 2 and really seeing the compelling evidence that she was a child, that Natalia was in fact 8. I would hope that she would change her tune. And I would guess that she would.
When she got that notice, can you imagine? The Barnetts even had their lawyer fire off a letter to the Department of Children's Services saying, look, she's an adult. You don't have any jurisdiction over her. But the Barnetts, again, are notified that it doesn't matter what Natalia's age is. She's a dependent because of her disability.
Okay, that's interesting. And I'm glad the government agency is monitoring the situation. That's what our tax dollars are doing for us, protecting us humans from people like Christine and Michael. So, yeah, this is more evidence to make the point that Christine and Michael were absolutely neglectful. Even if Natalia is indeed 22 or 23, she has a disability, so you have a requirement. Legally, you have a requirement. Of course, morally, they had a requirement, but they also have a legal requirement. So let's see what we hear in terms of how they responded. I'm guessing that we did see some of this footage in the first season where we saw at least Michael was recording a lot of things, probably in an attempt to demonstrate that Natalia is fine on her own. You know, like there's that film of her as she's dragging that garbage can up the ramp, which is just heartbreaking to watch. And Michael is like, look, she's fine. That's just, what are you, fine? What are you talking about, you fucking idiot? So I'm guessing that that's what they did. Yeah. And so even if they, I guess there are different levels to the lack of empathy and immorality of the parents, right? They wouldn't have been as horrifically immoral if at least they would have taken care of her. That still would have been immoral and horrific because she's 8 years old and she's in an apartment. But if they at least just took care of her, like if you're really looking for, as a parent, look, I just don't want to have to deal with what I believe to be a highly dangerous, problematic person in my house because of my other kids and myself. And so I got to get rid of the kid. But once that's established, then, mission accomplished. Might as well now take care of her, right? At least a little bit. It just takes time. Why not? Plus, she's a tiny person. Even if you think she's 22, do you not have any humanity? And so to try to get out from under that and we're not hearing any effort to connect her with, if they tried to find some neighbors to look after her or connecting her with services or something, the way they described it, and maybe they did, but even that, that's not enough. But the way they described it, it's like, look, in the first season, they're like, look, that apartment building was within half a mile of, this service and a grocery store and this thing and this thing. What are you talking about? She's 8 years old. Even if she were 22, she can't drive a car. She can barely walk. She talks about how even when she does walk, her feet are in terrible pain. She was talking about that one time when they were at the creamery and her feet were bleeding. Okay, fine, she can walk, but at what cost? So, yeah, it's just, wow.
And then coming out, I literally fell. I was so dizzy. I couldn't even walk straight. I couldn't even see straight. I felt so sick.
Okay, so the implication here is that when the parents were told that Natalia would be a dependent, perhaps for the rest of Natalia's life, given her disability, that the mom, Christine, resorted to killing her because she didn't want to have to take care of her. And the evidence that they're putting forward is that there was this one recalled incident in which Natalia remembers the mom being very adamant about her taking medication, and then she had a reaction. And she didn't die, of course, because she's still with us, but it's possible, but it'd be hard to demonstrate this to a jury because there's a lot of question marks there. It's possible. I mean, earlier I wouldn't have, if I gave it a percentage chance, I would have said, yeah, I don't know, 1 or 2%, but it's possible. Now, given all the other things that we have heard, because I often talk about how when you lie or when, well, not you, but when someone lies or when someone cheats on their partner, it's not just one lie. It's perhaps thousands of lies and thousands of choices to even cheat just once, right? Particularly if it's more than once, then there are thousands, if not millions, of little Ys in the road that you could go either way, and you decide to go further down this slippery slope. And then once you do it, by not telling your partner, every second that goes by that you have an opportunity to text or tell or write a letter or something is a choice to lie by omission. It's lying. And people that say, I never lied, I never, it's like, well, you knew that I wanted to know that information and you chose not to. That's lying. So with cheating or with lying, I think it's important to see it that way, because sometimes we can frame it as just like, oh, it was just one thing that happened. It wasn't just one thing. It was a lot of things that were hurtful and a lot of choices that you made that were not in consideration of me and were only selfish choices for yourself in harm of me. So when we look at, through that lens, at the parents, I guess not only at the lying, because it's possible that they knew she was a child, right? It seems highly likely that they knew. But even if we don't look at that, every second of every day that went by that they didn't take action to help her, even if she's in the apartment, to help her along the way, to help her take the garbage out or drive her somewhere or entertain her or protect her from the perpetrator, a sexual perpetrator 2 doors down. I don't know how many doors down he was, but couldn't have been that far because that apartment building wasn't huge. So every second of every day that goes by, that's a choice that is selfish and harmful. And you consider someone, because you've probably been there before, where your remorse or your shame or your guilt, it gnaws away at you, and then eventually, okay, fine, I'll do this thing. I feel like this happened to me, not in a big way, but this happened to me recently. I'm trying to remember what it was. I remember having this moment where I just said, just swallow your pride and do it, or something. I can't remember what it was, but I was drawing a boundary with someone that I deserved to draw a boundary with, but I was perhaps being too boundaried. That's the way I'll put it. Anyway, so I remember in that moment, I just felt like, I can't live with this, even though I feel like it's right. That's a situation where I felt like I know I'm right, and everyone around me knows I'm right. But, the guilt gnaws away at you, for better or for worse, I suppose. And so to not have that mechanism, or to have a large enough pushback on that every second of every day for both parents, by the way, that says something about one's personality. And therefore, the percentage chance that this actually did happen, where the mother legit tried to kill her, is a lot higher than what I would imagine otherwise. What percentage would I put to it? Given what I'm hearing, maybe there'll be more data here, but I would still say it's unlikely. It almost would be against what she would want, because if she dies, as Michael was saying a while back, I don't know if I show this clip, he's like, the worry that Christine had was that if Natalia dies, then it might become a news story, and then everyone might start looking into it, and her perfect persona as this perfect parent would be shattered, and she would lose all of her narcissistic supply and her money and everything. So I still wouldn't put it over 50%. The other thing is that, given what Natalia is saying, it's not uncommon for a parent to get real focused on medications, not only because it's good to do so for kids that are prescribed meds, but some parents, that have behavioral problem kids, for good reasons and bad reasons, they can become very fixated on meds. I've seen this before. I would work in home with some families where I would notice sort of two different categories. One category would be the kid would actually, if they miss their med, even by a couple hours, then we would see very, very problematic behaviors, whether it was them being erratic or rageful, or they might even have mini seizures or something, so you can have parents that can be very adamant about, you need to take this med, and it sometimes is against the will of the child, That's one category. Another category is parents will be over-focused because they just want the child to be subdued, and they don't want to take a risk. So that can be, obviously problematic depending, but parents can be very adamant about medications, especially if you observe a lot of behavior problems, which I think were probably present. So the way Natalia is telling a story, now, should you just leave a child by themselves as they are taking a medication that they're telling you is causing them to be very drowsy? No. Especially drowsiness. I mean, if you hear that from anybody, then talk to physicians. So, by the way, listen. The first action is like, oh, well, don't take the med. Let's talk to the doctor. Or let's talk to a nurse or something. Because drowsiness, that's sometimes, not all the time, but it's a precursor to injury or death. So, to consider that, if Natalia is telling the truth, which you can't really know, then it's hard. It could be a number of things. It could be literally trying to kill her, which I guess I would put at about 20% now, given what I've heard. I think it also could be that the mom was just unconcerned about the side effects because she doesn't care, and is just like, look, you need to take these meds because it makes you easier to deal with. Or maybe a smaller percentage chance, maybe 10% chance that this was like the way any parent, good or bad, would actually act in this situation. Like, well, this is the prescribed med, and remember what happened to you last time you didn't take the med on time. So it's hard to know what happened, but I can't believe that I'm considering a 20% chance that a mother tried to kill her adopted child. That tells you just the amount of atrocious data that we've been given already. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So I've found that most people would benefit by getting things off of their chest. With all the pressures that we're under, it just feels good to get some relief now and then, It especially feels good if someone is there to listen to us, someone who really cares about us. And, keeping these things bottled up can cause various problems. Along these lines, therapy can be a wonderful place to talk openly about what is plaguing us. I mean, one of the main reasons I became a therapist is because when I was 19, I wanted to get things off of my chest. I had friends and family to talk to, but I found that I wanted to talk to a third party, an objective third party, like a therapist. Well, one place you can find a therapist is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Dizzy. Literally, like, my eyes were going cross. It was so blurry. And then I fell asleep, like, I blacked out. For, like, hours until 2 in the morning. Thinking back on it, like, it felt like she really did try to overdose me.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of the intention of Christine, she could have died. That story is the story you'll hear about people dying or having oxygen cut off to their brain enough that there's injury to the brain. And it's interesting the way she just phrased that. She's like, well, thinking back on it, it seems possible she could have been trying to kill me. That lends credibility to her whole story because she doesn't know. She doesn't know the intention. But given everything, she's like, maybe it's possible. So that lends itself to believing the whole story.
I really could have died that day. I was 7 years old taking an adult drug. And
yeah, I didn't even think about that. Right. So she's telling a story about prior to being kicked out of the house. So that time then doesn't work out with the dependency, or does it work out? Anyway, at the very least, yeah, I mean, is that what happened? That because she's identified as an adult that somehow stronger drugs are, but her size, I don't know. I don't have enough information.
One day I remember I was living in the first apartment. I was taking medicine.
Right, so I rewound it because I forgot exactly what she said. So she was saying I was in the first apartment. So she's saying she was 7 at the time. I don't really understand.
I don't remember what it was. It was like 3 different pills for the mental stuff that Christine claimed I had. And I remember waking up, taking...
And to be clear, it was prescribed in all likelihood by a qualified prescriber, and they might have done a thorough evaluation and found that she did indeed would be helped by these medications. Having said that, I would see children that would seemingly be given meds not because the med actually was legit, and not because the diagnosis was legit, but because the med just made the child tired and more docile, easier to handle. And so it's sort of like a lobotomy light, if you will. It's like, okay, great. They're no longer aggressive or defiant, but they also are zoned out the entire time. I didn't see that very often because, most parents don't want to see that. If anything, I would see parents avoid medications too often when medications could have helped. But anyway, so we're hearing she's saying that she was 7 when she was in.
And then I fell back to sleep because the medicine made me sleepy. And I think it was like literally only an hour later, Christine came and she was knocking on the door like...
Okay, then she takes the med in the apartment. Christine came by, knocking on the door.
Pounding on the door. And I opened the door and she literally was like, "Why are you still sleeping?" Like, she was mad that I was asleep. And I told her I was tired. Christine was very on edge that day. And then she was like, "Did you take your medicine?" And I was like, "Yes, I did."
Right. So it's interesting going back, hearing the end of this story, and also having the way that she presents it sounds credible. It's hard to know, and also it was a long time ago, but it could be a very notable story to her because she passed out and she would remember like that was a particularly interesting incident. But then she's saying that the mom didn't believe her that she took the med. Yeah, it's hard to know because, she was young. Yeah, it could be an honest memory, but it could be jumbled up. This could be like 5 different stories crammed into one. At the very least, is it possible that Christine tried to kill it? The other thing is that if Christine wanted to kill her, it wouldn't take much. She had the ability, and the fact that if this is all we have in terms of any sort of data along these lines, then that would point either in the direction that it was an impulsive thing that she said, "I'm not going to go that far with this," or it doesn't serve me to actually kill her because then I might get noticed. So I would say that it's funny. As I watch this, it's like knowing the truth helps to stand on a foundation of something, but we're just not given enough information. Is the thing we just don't know. And I will speculate, I think, partially because I think what I can provide the internet is a clinical opinion about things. Part of that involves recognizing that unless we have factual data, then we can't really know much.
So she literally got my medicine, gave it to me.
Yeah, so the rest of it I remember pretty well, but let's move on.
And that's scary. Like, the fact that Christine tried to say she tried to murder my family, but then she tried to pretty much murder me.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about but haven't been talking about, that it is interesting how for people that are harmful to others, that they will often accuse others of the thing that they do. And there are various different ideas about this, but one is called projection. And in the lay public, they use projection in this other way. They tend to use projection to mean displacement, which is fine, lay people. But in the clinical world, projection is to project an unwanted aspect of self, a feeling, a trait, a behavior, an urge. So if Christine knew about herself, or if Christine either subconsciously or consciously knew that she actually has murderous intent or harmful intent on others, then one of the defenses, because people want to believe that they're good people, and they don't want to believe that they're immoral. That might be shocking to hear, because I feel like on the internet that's not usually the way people are characterized. There are evil people, so to speak, but even what we might call, like a Charlie Manson or a Ted Bundy or something, even they will want often to see themselves as good people and will have elaborate justifications like, well, that person was going to die anyway, or, like in Killers of the Flower Moon, the character depicted by Robert De Niro, he would say that. The character, I don't know if the actual individual in history said that, but the character would say, yeah, well, those Native Americans are going to die anyway. So it doesn't justify it, of course, but what it does is it helps them to feel better about themselves as if they're not the evil person that they are. And so for Christine, it's possible that a lot of the allegations were projections, that she actually didn't like these aspects of herself and she would see it in others. Another reason for this is that when you're capable of something and you have urges or you've done bad things like this, then you're much more likely to believe that others are going to do it because you know that you could do it and you have done it. It's like with infidelity. Often that's a projection, right? You will be in a relationship and you haven't cheated, but you have a partner that is just constantly accusing you of cheating. And then later on you find out that they were cheating. It's like you were obsessed with infidelity and how horrible it was and you were doing it. So part of it is that projection part. But another part of it is like, well, I know people cheat because I'm cheating and so they must be cheating, So it is, there's been a number of details given that makes me wonder about Christine's personality and how that manifested in the attacking from all different angles on Natalia. All right, well, let's adjourn there for now. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really, really do.